Hey guys, how's it going? Thank you for stopping by and checking out this video. So a few videos back, I said something about, I really asked a question if you guys were interested in hearing a life story. And I didn't get a whole lot of responses, but every response I got was yes, so here we go. I was born in the first half of the 70s, we'll say that. And I was born in rural Pennsylvania. About an hour outside of Philadelphia, a little more outside of Philadelphia. Not too far from where the Amish people live. That rural. On a farm at an intersection of 4 dirt roads in the bottom of a valley. Very, like rural Route 3 of the main town. Pretty far outside of that. Probably at least dirt roads for a mile in every direction to get out of where we lived. Farming community for the most part. And my parents were pretty young. By the way, they're still married. You guys are awesome, Mom and Dad. And my parents were, they were kind of hip people, I guess. They weren't squares. They were, I like to call them biker hippies. I don't know if that's really what they were, but they used to ride motorcycles. And when I was a kid, my father is still to this day a Harley Davidson nut. He loves his Harleys. And he still rides them, so good for him. But when I was a kid, he had a 66 Harley Davidson shovelhead with, I think, a 1948 sidecar on it. And that's about a World War II sidecar, if I'm correct. And, 66 shovelhead FL. First year generator shovel, to be honest with you. And we would ride that on vacation. We would take that on vacation. And I say that, but really what would happen is I like to say we would ride it one direction until it broke down to the point where we couldn't fix it anymore or ran out of money and then we had to go back. I remember times breaking down in Wyoming from Pennsylvania and we had to buy a pickup truck to get it all home. I remember another time when we broke down in Nova Scotia, Canada, and it was more economical and faster for my dad's friend to buy the parts to fix the bike in Pennsylvania and drive them up to Nova Scotia to rescue us. I went to Sturgis Bike Week probably when I was 7 for the first time. Kind of sleeping under underpasses and sleeping in drainage ditches and, mooching in, rest areas and stuff like that. Living on like devil's ham and deviled chicken and peanut butter and honey sandwiches. And, I talk about it now and you're probably like, wow, that was great. But when I was a kid, I just thought it was how everybody acted. I thought that's how everybody was. I thought everybody did cool stuff like that. I didn't realize that my parents were like way cooler than most parents. So, and I grew up on that farm. So when we weren't out traveling around, I literally had to walk like a mile up the hill to the bus stop in, 4-season weather. I didn't have any brothers and sisters. No real kids lived close, so I got real good at being by myself at a real young age. I would go fishing. My grandfather, who lived right across the street from us, was a horse guy, so I would ride horses and work in the fields and throw hay bales and all that farm stuff, all the farm kid stuff. That's what I did, all that stuff. And then when I was about 12, I guess, maybe 11, I don't quite remember, my father opened up a motorcycle shop where they worked on Harleys. Not a Harley shop, it was just a motorcycle shop. And then after that, I spent the summers down there working on motorcycles with him or being a knucklehead kid and drinking way too many sodas and all that fun stuff. And then, blah, 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 graduated high school, did all that stuff, played in some bands. I played my first gig when I was actually 14 years old, 15 maybe. We were in like a heavy metal cover band, and the only reason I got that gig is because I was the only kid in school who had a bass guitar. That's why I was a bass player, was because nobody else wanted to do it. Still pretty much like that now. And then once I graduated high school, I got a regular job, crappy regular job, and crappy apartment with a roommate, and did that for a couple of years. and just kind of flew by the seat of my pants like a young knucklehead, single man would. And then in 1995, I got back in touch with an old girlfriend right around the time I turned 21. And we got back together, and she had 2 daughters when we got back together. One was 3 and one was like 7 months old. And a couple years later, we got married. And, I kind of still played music, but kind of got a regular job. I had like a job where I would go 9 to 5 and work in an office. And I even had a secretary for a while. And, I made some mistakes and decided that I just wasn't into the corporate world, really. It was what it came down to, was I wasn't in the corporate world. I was in a union, a laborers union, and I'm not going to lie, I got a good work ethic, and I know a lot of stuff. I knew a lot of stuff already then, and they pulled me out of the ditches and put me in an office as a purchasing manager on some big projects, like I with one stroke of the pen, I spent $3.1 million. Not my money, but stuff like that, big stuff, clean room stuff, time and material with not to exceed budgets. I mean, it was a great job. Got a lot of perks, went to a lot of Flyers games and stuff like that. But then I grew out of that. I didn't want to do that anymore. So I went to the Carpenters Union for a while, and I was still playing in bands. And about 8.5 years into being married, unfortunately, my wife was killed in a car accident. That would have been in 2006. And she left me these 2 little girls. And not to go too far into the details of that, but I decided that the best thing to do when that happened was for me to adopt the 2 daughters. So I did. And, honestly, it was probably other than marrying my wife, adopting those 2 little girls was the second greatest thing I ever did. And I'm happy to say my daughters are both very successful in their chosen worlds. My oldest daughter is a wonderful mother to my 2 grandsons. She has an amazing husband. And my youngest daughter is a real estate rock star. You've seen her on this channel once or twice before. And her and her husband, they got a bunch of dogs and some really fast race cars. So maybe one day I'll post you some videos of those guys with their race cars. She races a Tesla, and he races a 1,300 horsepower Corvette. So anyway, I'm sure my daughters worry more about me than I do them. So that's pretty cool. And then after all that happened and we got everything kind of straightened out, it took me about 1.5 years in Pennsylvania to realize that I just didn't want to be there anymore. And I wanted to see something different, and I wanted my daughters to see something different. So, on a whim, we moved 2,400 miles west to where we knew no one except for one person. And that was Tucson, Arizona. So in 2007, I guess my daughters were 11 and 13 at that time. We packed up everything we had and moved to Tucson. And I went out there with I was going out there to be a musician. And I gave myself very short time. Like, I told myself, you got 6 months to get steady, and you got 1 year to take this town over. And I'm not going to lie to you, I did it. I was there a couple weeks, and I started getting weekly gigs. I had weekly open mic nights. By the way, thanks to a guy named Phil Stahl from Allentown, Pennsylvania area, somewhere in Pennsylvania area, because his open mic blueprint is exactly what I did when I went out to Tucson, because no one was doing that, and that's what enabled me to do that. So I got out there, hosted these open mics, I had a weekly call-in radio show where I would play recordings from the open mics from the weeks prior. I would have some live entertainment on that as well. And while I was doing that, I met 2 very important people. And I'm going to tell you both of their names right now. The first guy I met, his name was called Gary Bonnet. And Gary, if you see this video, how you doing, brother? He's a really great frontman songwriter out of a real small town in West Virginia that I met in Tucson. He actually walked into my open mic night, asked to play, and went up on stage and played about 4 songs. And then he came down and sat down and talked to me a little bit. And then he came back the next week and the next week. And the 4th week he came back, he gave me this CD. And he said, this is my new CD. It's called The Long Road Home. We're putting a tour together. I need to put a band together. And I want you to be my bass player, and I want you to be my band leader. Now he pulled up with a 41-foot Silver Eagle tour bus. What was I going to say? No, getting on a tour bus has been my dream my whole life. So I did that. And I also played, at that time, I was also playing in another band called Gaza Strip, which is a great punk band out of Tucson, Arizona. If you've never heard them, go check them out after this is over. And I did both of those bands, touring with Gary, mostly regional, Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, for about a year, while I was still playing local gigs with the band Gaza Strip. And then we started going further, and it came to the point where I couldn't be in both bands at the same time, so I had to part ways with Gaza Strip and went full-time with Gary. And we did that for a couple years, and on one of the breaks home, I happened to be down at a club just shooting some pool, actually. I used to be a member of the APA Pool League sometimes, out of the Hut in Tucson, Arizona. Anyway, while I'm there, this blonde-haired guy walks in with a guitar over his back, walks up on the stage and just starts playing. Didn't plug in, lights weren't on or nothing. He just starts playing and singing songs. And I had played this club before, so I walked around the back curtain and flipped a couple switches and made the microphone live and plugged him in. And about 10 minutes later, they kicked us both out of the bar. But that guy's name was Nathan Earl Mayers from Perth, West Australia. And he was on a trip around the world. That's all he was doing. He had a book full of songs, and he was just playing his songs. So I still drank at the time. Had a couple drinks in us, and we went back to my house. And he moved in, basically. A couple weeks later, he and I left Tucson and flew to Pennsylvania, played some shows in Pennsylvania. And we flew back to Colorado, played some Colorado shows. And then he took off around the world, and that was that. A year or so later, 2 years later, I guess, my oldest daughter was graduating high school, and Nathan, he came back over for a couple reasons. One of them was to see my daughter graduate, and the other one was to play some shows and stuff like that. He and I were at a golf tournament for a fellow musician who had some cancer treatments that he couldn't afford. So it was like a fundraising golf tournament. And while we were there, we won a couple hours of studio time. And it just so happened that my father was in town, who's a lead guitar player, and a good friend of mine, Doug Palmer, who I'd played in lots of bands with before. We all got together at another friend of mine's house, used their sound studio for an hour, went over some tunes, went into Pitball Records, Next Door Studios. Oliver was the engineer on that. And we recorded, I think, 5 tracks in not much time at all. And they were all tracks that Nathan had written. He had already had 5 other tracks recorded. So he put those together and all of a sudden he had a 10-song CD. And he called it the Prize Project because most of the stuff was won on a prize. And he got that over to West Australia. And long story short, one of the songs got picked up on Triple J. So he called me up and he said, hey man, let's do a little tour. So in 2012, I flew all the way across the ocean from Los Angeles to Sydney, Australia. And then from Sydney, Australia, I flew all the way to Perth, West Australia. I think it took me about 20 hours. But then we spent 3 months just having an amazing time in Western Australia and South Australia. Saw some awesome stuff. Got to go to Melbourne. Just super lucky to be able to do that. I didn't have to take any gear. The band was waiting for me. I got in there. The next night we had our first practice. met some amazing people, and yeah, did all that. After that tour was over, I flew back home, and then I really didn't know what I wanted to do. And for about a year, I just bummed around and played golf, like a lot of golf. And then after that year was over, I decided I needed to do something, so I got back into the regular working world and just stopped being a musician. And I had a bunch of oddball jobs, nothing crazy. And then I became a pawnbroker, which I loved being a pawnbroker, probably almost more than I loved being a musician. And I would still probably be a pawnbroker, except COVID-19 happened. And that just killed the entire pawn industry. Because if people are getting free money in their mailbox, they ain't got to pawn their stuff to pay nothing, And it's not like Chumley and all that stuff on Pawn Stars. The biggest thing you do in pawnbroking is write loans. You pawn stuff. That's 75% of your business. I don't want to work at a retail shop, and that's what pawnbroking became. So I quit that, and I had a pretty decent maintenance background, from growing up on a farm and just knowing how to fix stuff. So I got offered a job as like the maintenance supervisor for a halfway house, working with inmates and stuff like that. So I did that for a little while. Then I got headhunted by an assisted living facility. They wanted me to be the maintenance director. So I did that for about a year. Then I got headhunted by Walmart. They wanted me to be a facility engineer for their super centers. So I did that for a little while. I hated that. Totally hated that. Then I went and became a maintenance supervisor for a company called Graystar, which is like one of the biggest companies in the world, up in Colorado. And I lived in Colorado for about a year. And I loved living in Colorado. I hated the job. So after a year of that job, I decided that's it. I had already got the war wagon and already had it built out and ready to go. So I jumped in the war wagon, and that would have been 2024 in May. And I started my van life, my real van life. I actually left Tucson in 2023. I was on the road for 2 days, and I found this job in Durango, and it paid a bunch of money, like a lot of money, and it gave me housing as well. So I couldn't say no, and I live 80 feet off the Animas River. It was a great gig, but it was just too much work for one person to handle, and I had become a pretty miserable person. So I went out on the road and started my van life, which brings us to where we are now, really, kind of. I started my van life in May of 2024. I went to Quartzsite, Arizona, the winter of 2024, 2025. I got monetized on YouTube in January of 2025. And I've been doing this since. I did take one job last summer before I went to Alaska, which we'll get to Alaska in a minute. Good friend of mine, Pete, had a roofing job, and he brought me on as a guy just to kind of supervise some stuff. So I did that for a few months. And then my friends David and Diana, that you guys probably know, and Julie, they proposed the Alaska trip. And on May 17th, 2025, we pulled out of Kentucky in their Sprinter van and a 2023 Toyota 4Runner. Maybe it was 2024. And we drove from Kentucky to Anchorage, Alaska. There's all videos, there's a lot of videos on the channel now going back to actually even the build of the war wagon. So I guess if you want to talk about when van life started, I would say that van life started in 2021 is I think when I bought the war wagon. Maybe 2022. Either way, I worked on a war wagon for a year before I left because it had been sitting for 6 years. And I'm still working on a war wagon as of right now. As a matter of fact, tomorrow I take this thing in to get a transmission cooler put on it. And hopefully that will enable me to make it all the way into the job that I have to go to and start on April 15th in Colorado. But really, that is my life story in a nutshell. It's 20 minutes that I rambled on. I'm sure I left out a lot of stuff, like a lot of stuff. But I also got to keep some privacy too. So maybe I'll elaborate on some stuff if you guys leave some questions in the comments or something like that. But that's it. That's how I got to where I am right now. So I want to thank you all for watching this video, liking the videos, subscribing to the channel, and leaving me comments. That is awesome. Like, I love waking up in the morning and reading comments and responding to comments, you know. And you guys just keep me going. You know, there's 6,000 some of you subscribers now, which is, I never thought I would get to that point. And, you know, we get more every day. Not a lot, you know, but we get a little bit more every day. So I thank you for that. And if you like this content and you're not subscribed, you'd sure be doing me a favor if you did and hitting that like button. But that's going to do it for this one. We'll see you on the next one. Keep on vanning.